And hello people, this is a video that I have already recorded it in the Greek language for the Greek people, but now I'm making it in English because I do believe it is important. So the reason I'm making this video is because I had a Greek young lady contacting me. She studies the books of Keshiali and Khalid Abul-Fadl, and her point of interest is slavery. What was the position of female slaves in the Proto-Islamic era. So she contacted me to express a confusion, because Keshiali in her book, she writes that Muslim men could have 4 wives and numerous female slaves as concubines, so they could have sex with the slaves. Khalid Abul-Fadl mentions or claims in his book that owners of female slaves could have sex with them, but only within marriage. So the Greek follower, she asked me to position myself. So who is right, Keshiali or Khalid Abul-Fadl? To begin with, I will not position myself because I do not consider myself knowledgeable enough on the topic, and when I don't feel confident about my knowledge, I don't express opinions. But beyond that, the objective, we should see things from a perspective. And my answer to the comment, to the message, it was a message in Messenger, was that they are both right. And of course, here comes the question, how can they be both right? Well, I explain to you. Humans, we make 2 mistakes. One, it's a mistake when it comes to history, okay? Because now here the whole point is it's not about theology, it's about sociology and history. What practices some humans in the past were following. So when it comes to history, we need to be conscious of time and space. And what do I mean by that? I will explain first the element of space. And I will give you an example from my background. I'm Greek, I'm from Crete, and in Crete there are 2 different cities. One is called Chania and the other one is called Iraklio. Now these cities, with the car you can travel between them 2.5 hours trip. So they're very close to each other. However, when it comes to cultural practices, in Chania, the tradition in a wedding is for the food that will be offered to the guests to be pilafi. Pilafi is a food that we make with rice. In Iraklio, the tradition dictates that the food that is offered in wedding parties is pasta, handmade pasta, traditional pasta. Why do I give this example? Because if 1,400 years later someone writes about the cultural practices of weddings in Crete, not in entire Greece, just Crete, this island, one island, 2 cities apart. If this historian will focus on or will read a source mentioning or describing a wedding in Iraklio, this historian 1,400 years later will write that, oh, the Cretans were eating pasta. If his sources are from Chania, he will be like, no, the Cretans were eating pilafi. And if we have 2 different historians having 2 different sources, then they will clash with each other. They will both be right. We talk about Muslims, what Muslims were doing with their slaves at the beginning of the Proto-Islamic era. Which Muslims? In which city, in which village, in which area? There is a chance that could be different practices in different cities. Another example to show you how space is important comes from Islamic history, comes from Ibn Batuta. Those of you that you don't know Ibn Batuta was a Qadi, was a judge, a trained judge, but he liked very much traveling the world, and he kept his memoirs, and these memoirs today we consider them to be first source about history. So Ibn Batuta was from the Middle East. He traveled in Asia, he traveled in Africa. At some point he went to Mauritania. When he went to Mauritania, and he went to visit the tent or the house of the Mauritanian Qadi. He found the Mauritanian Qadi being alone with a female, chatting, just having fun, chatting. And then he was shocked. He was like, who is this woman? Why is she alone in privacy with you? And the Mauritanian judge was like, oh, she's my best friend. I was like, oh my dear God, how dare you do something like that? And Ibn Batuta left the Mauritanian Qadi's house, expressing his distress and his, he was abhorred about what he saw. And the Mauritanian just smiled and was like, chill a bit. Okay, that's our practices here. Our women here are not like your women over there. The same period. This was in the 14th century Gregorian calendar, 7th century Islamic calendar. Same period, different places, different practices. So if someone comes and says, oh, Muslims were always Muslim men were not contacting or were not in contact with Muslim women other than their, halal. No, not in Mauritania. And we have the primary source from Ibn Batuta. So again, we need to be conscious of space. So back to the question of the follower that she messaged me. What were the practices? Who is right, Kashi Ali or Khalid ibn Fadl? They can both be right if we consider that perhaps their sources are coming from different cities or from different places at the same time. Now comes the question of time. Was it the same time? And in this aspect, I want you just to contemplate. Because usually when we talk about the Proto-Islamic era, we talk about the 1st century. Okay, but a century is many years. So as an exercise, go outside and look around in your neighborhood, only your neighborhood, and think how was your neighborhood 100 years ago? Or in general, knowing history, if you know history. What has changed in your city, in your village, in your neighborhood for the last 100 years? Are practices the same? Are habits the same? Forget about socioeconomic and political. When it comes to practices, 100 years ago, a girl at the age of 15 was married and had children. Today, if a girl at the age of 15 is being approached by a man, that man will go to jail because today it's unethical. Back then it was okay. 100 years ago in England, young children were working in factories. Young children were cleaning the chimneys. That was okay. 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we didn't have human rights. The notion, the concept of human rights, something that today everyone throws tantrums about, didn't exist. So, back to the point of who of the academics is right and who writes history correctly. Time and space are important contributing factors. And in my opinion, both scholars are right. The difference is that most probably there was a space and time difference between the communities that they talk about. I'm not quite sure whether this is in their book. This is clarified, like, okay, we will talk about the community of 70 or 75. I'm talking years. Usually it's not, and this is a human nature. This is we do that. Even academics, we do that. We homogenize and we group together communities. We shouldn't. But then it becomes a very hectic job to start saying, oh, in this village they were doing that, in another village we were doing the other, and in another village we were doing something else. Also, there's a difference between what we have as evidence, which usually is the Qadi's books, records, and what was actually happening in the streets. Okay? Even today, we know that certain things are illegal, and a historian of the future might think that, oh, this was not happening because it was illegal. But we do know that it's happening in the streets. Okay? Now, when it comes to the topic specifically about were slaves, were owners of slaves having sex with them within or outside marriage? Personal opinion, based on human nature and observation of males, and also knowing history. This idea of female slaves being sexual objects for their masters existed long before Islam, existed in ancient Greece, existed in ancient Rome, existed in Abraham, in the Abrahamic story from biblical point of view. Abraham could not have child with Sarah, so Sarah permitted him, according to the Bible, to have a child with a slave girl. And then when Sarah got pregnant, she ordered him to kick out of the house the slave girl. So I don't think that the slave girl consented. Abraham has not, we don't have any biblical references that Abraham got married with the slave girl. So the notion of women belonging to men, therefore men having sex with them freely, was always the case. Not only with men. There is a famous story in Rome, ancient Rome, where a slave owner was raping male slaves, and then they couldn't deal with that anymore, and they decided to kill him. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the assassination attempt was unsuccessful. He survived, and then he took them to the court, and as a punishment, all their family members were executed before they were executed. Where here we see that the owner had the right of life over their slaves because they were they were his belongings. So did the Muslim men have sex with their slaves without marrying them? I don't question that. We are in 2024 and we still try to teach men that their wives, that they're not slaves, they're wives, okay? And they work, they contribute in the house 50-50 and everything, that they don't belong to them, okay? We still try to teach that. We still try to teach men that they don't have the right to rape, that they don't have the right to grope, they don't have the right to sexually assault free women, not slave women, in 2024. I don't find it hard to believe that Muslim men, they will have sex with their slaves outside marriage in the Proto-Islamic era. And yes, the Qadis will tell you, oh, but you know, it was illegal, or we are supposed to get married. Yes, but in the Quran, God says that you have right over, you know, your wives and those that your right hand possesses. And historically, the Qadis took this to mean the slaves. So the slave girls were sexual subjects of their masters. It is what it is. It was in ancient Greece. We know it through Iliada. This was the case when they were having war and they were capturing women. The women were distributed among the warriors as slaves. And the next scene you see in Iliada is how the warrior has sex with the slave. So this was the case. Unfortunately, women, historically, we have always been objects in the hands of men. Except if rules, regulations, you know, dictating otherwise. So yes, I do find it very possible. I find very possible what Keshi Ali says, that they were having sex with their slave girls outside marriage. But I do not question Khalid Abul Fadl. They could potentially study different areas or different time periods, or what was the official practice, and what was the, you know, what was the official rule and what was the actual practice. What I want you to take from this video is not about the slaves. Go and read about the slaves. It is about knowledge. No human on earth can give you 100% accurate account, historical account of any previous generation. Not because we don't have good scholars, not because they are evil and they want to mislead you, but because there are many elements in play, like space, like time, like popular practices, common practices, rules and regulations. Those of you that you are in academia, those of you that you study or you have a love for knowledge, you know that already. It's all about perspectives, and academics do the best that they can. That's why it's good for people to read more than one authors, to have, you know, a more rounded perspective. But there is no absolute truth. It is what we can today assume based on evidence. But there is no absolute truth. So don't be quick to judge the academics, and at the same time don't take something as the absolute and unquestionable reality. That's it because X academic said it. Things could be different. That is all. Thank you for watching the video, and I shall see you in one of the next videos.